I think we are behind schedule. The threat I see emerging is that parties want to link the negotiations on the new agreement to other issues such as climate finance and loss and damage, which means even though there could have been some progress on the new agreement, it might get more difficult because other issues are being brought into the mix, issues that are more difficult to resolve this year, and that might slow progress.
What do you think is going to be a reasonable outcome of this final week? What would you be expecting to hear to know from your own point of view that these talks were progressing in a sort of relatively smooth fashion, or at least they were going forward?
Well, a useful outcome would be if the parties could agree on some building blocks towards Paris. For instance, some guidelines on what kind of commitments might be acceptable, a timeline for when commitments should be delivered before Paris, and perhaps some progress also in indicators. How are you going to review ambition and equity? How do the commitments compare to each country's responsibility and capability?
You were telling me before we started recording that a number of your colleagues had been involved in the recent UN climate science report run by the organisation called the IPCC. How do you feel that's changed the nature of these talks, or maybe do you sense it's made anything here feel more urgent?
Well, I think it's a mixed impact. So the first thing to say is that without the work of the IPCC, these big international summaries of the research going on, we probably wouldn't have the climate negotiations. They are the foundation. The science is the foundation. It's the reason why we're here. Having said that, I don't think the recent report has had much of an actual impact on negotiations. If anything, we've seen countries scaling down their level of ambition during this first week, rather than ramping up the ambition, which might seem the natural response to the alarming messages from the IPCC.
And when you look at this whole process, everyone seems to have their own suggestions and ideas for how it could be improved. What particular aspects do you think could be worked on?
I think one challenge is that the climate negotiations act as if they live in their own little bubble. But that doesn't mean there are so many other climate initiatives going on, sector-based, city-based, technology-based, and there's no mechanism to link that to what's going on under these negotiations.
And give us a sense about what you'd like to see change then. Is there anything in particular that could be tinkered with? In many ways, it's such a confusing and complex process anyway. I suppose if you mess about with it anymore, it might get look completely like a plate of spaghetti. But what in particular do you think could be tinkered with or changed?
I would focus on two aspects. The first one is simply learning. There are so many actions going on in terms of adaptation and mitigation nationally that are not part of the commitments under the climate negotiations that we could learn from much more effectively. If there was some forum, some platform for sharing useful national experiences, that could be one way forward to help countries learn. Instead of everyone reinventing the wheel, you learn from what others have done and you can more quickly ramp up your actions. So the first aspect is learning. The second aspect is linking different initiatives. So one example is that if you have a country with a set cap on its emissions, and say a city in that country decides to ramp up, they're going to cut emissions 50% in the next 10 years, what happens? At the outset, because there's a national cap, all it means is that others can do less and you'll still meet a national cap. So the question is, when you get other initiatives that increase total ambition, how do you make sure you capture that? How can you, for instance, increase commitments over time in proportion to other initiatives that emerge?